Welcome, you're listening to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton and this is part 4 and our final episode of the People and Culture, Training and Safety segment. In this episode, I meet up with co-founder and director Peter Mcgee of Victual. Now, I like to best describe Victual as a turnkey safety management system that brewery owners and related industries can access and utilise for developing formal safety processes within their business. They offer much more than this, which Peter shares with us in today's episode, including their beverage recall insurance program to assist brewery owners with the unfortunate event of having to carry out a recall on defected products heading out to the consumer market. We also dive into the dangers and hazards a worker and business in the brewing industry faces and how their streamlined platform and on-site support assists brewery owners to better manage safety and risk within their business and workplace. So I'll leave you to our final episode in the segment, Peter Mcgee from Victual. Welcome, Peter, to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thanks for having me.
How we got in touch, I always like to explain to the audience how guests sort of come to be. I'm actually doing the Cert 3 microbrewing course at TAFE and actually came across your guys' platform and what you're delivering to the brewing industry and other beverage industries. And I thought, well, a topic that we haven't really gone over a lot is safety in the brewing industry, and probably something that's not talked a lot about in the industry. And it is quite a hazardous work environment. And
Absolutely.
Want to share with everyone what those hazards and risks are, and also how Victual and also the program BrewSafe can help breweries streamline some of those processes.
Sure.
And so before we actually get into all that, want to get to know a bit more about you, probably before your beginnings with Victual and any humble beginnings with the craft beer.
Yeah, well, I actually grew up on a wheat and barley farm, so I'd like to think maybe some of that barley ends up in some craft brew these days, with my family still running that farm. I guess my home brewing is a classic failed home brewing, short-lived experience during my uni days. So it's fair to say I'm not going to be challenging anyone in the brewing industry with any new products coming out soon. But yeah, certainly love a beer. But I guess my background, I'm a fire engineer by qualification, but for the last 15 years have been running risk management consulting teams covering safety, food safety, business interruption, fire protection type of hazards and risks. And about 8 years ago, set up Victual with myself and my business partner to create a business really focused on food and bev industry, because obviously it's a big industry, a really important industry in Australia, but it's also an industry that has a lot of risk inherently, and therefore it's an industry that we believe we can add a lot of value to.
Yeah. Craft beer stories in terms of what sort of turned you on to craft. You said you're a beer lover. Surely, I mean, I've had some guests on. It depends on what part of the industry they've come from. Like I had interviewed a whole bunch of beer distributors last week, and all of them wanted to play Switzerland when it came to favourite breweries and beers. Do you have a favourite brewery, and do you have a favourite beer style?
You look, to be honest, I really love the variety about trying different beers. I'm probably on the pale ale kind of, that would be my preferred beer of choice, if you like. But I like tasting different brewers, and certainly we've been running the BrewSafe program now for a couple of years, and getting to know a few of the brewers and trying different styles I really enjoy that, actually. So I probably do need to be a little bit of Switzerland, given that we've got a few brewery clients. But no, and they're all. A thing I love about working with the industry as well is that everyone collaborates so well together. So I don't think it is about being unique or showing anyone favour. But I love the variety side of things there.
Yeah. So pale ale man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I've had a lot of people come on and say they're IPA men or women. Yeah, something sessionable. That seems to be where a lot of people are moving towards, rather than some of these triple IPAs and blue muffin pastry stouts that people say is classed as beer, but it's craft beer for you.
Yeah.
But that's good to, I guess, get an understanding of where you've come from, and about the family as well, being on a barley farm. I guess it's a sort of interesting the way that you've gone in servicing the brewing industry and getting to see that. But want to understand a bit about Victual and some of the content and the platform that you guys are giving out to the industry. Give us a bit of a summary of exactly what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, set the business up about 8 years ago, very much focused on food and bev. So in that sense, across anything from, we call it farm to fork. So, we've got clients that are literally growers through to retailers, and certainly a bulk of our clients are manufacturers. We then identified, I suppose, and got in touch with the Brewers Association a few years ago now, and talking to a few of the brewers at the time, saw a need for something specific in relation to safety. So hence we've designed the program over the last few years to kind of meet that need in the industry.
Yeah, perfect. And talking about the partnership that you had with the IBA, that was basically the title of that was IBA Safe. Yeah. You able to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so nearly 3 years ago now, as I said, we kind of had the initial discussions, and at the time the IBA board knew there was a need and really didn't want to overcomplicate it, and said, look, let's just start. And that's what we did. We just got going with a safety program. It was called IBA Safe, and we've actually literally over the last 3 months have gone through a pretty detailed review of that program and asked for a lot of feedback from, existing clients and others in the industry who know a lot about safety, and have got some really good feedback to now we're at a point where we're actually about to relaunch the program. So the IBA Safe is what it used to be called, and now it's going to be called BrewSafe moving forward. And that's also aligning with the direction that the IBA and the board are taking there. And we're certainly keen to keep working with them to make sure that we're delivering a program that ultimately meets the members' needs in that regard.
Yeah. And it's not just the brewing industry that, in terms of clientele, you're able to talk about some of the other industries?
Yeah, look, as I said, it's lots of manufacturers. So any type of food manufacturer that you could think of, we've got some pretty big, high-profile brands, if you like, in the stable, some retailers. So it is quite broad. I guess where we do like to offer a full service to larger, I suppose, food companies, and that can be anything from the enterprise risk side of things, where we're delivering advice to a board about broad risks in their business, through to delivering the insurance program, because part of the service offering is also a tailored insurance offering to food and bev clients. But then there's also comes out of that is areas where there's a specific need in relation to risk, and safety is clearly one of those. Another area we spend a lot of time and effort on is food safety, and in particular product recall support. So there's kinds of clear, defined solutions that we deliver for food and bev clients, ultimately because there's that need out there in the market.
And you can essentially provide support and services anywhere in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So head office in North Sydney, but the team travel when we're allowed to pretty extensively across Australia, again, when we're allowed to, into New Zealand as well. And as I say, it's a team with pretty broad capability. As I said, I'm a fire engineer originally, but we got people with health and safety qualifications, food safety. We've got mechanical engineers that look at plant and equipment and pressure vessels and those kinds of things. So it's a pretty broad capability in the team.
And you mentioned that you're moving to an online platform. I know you touched a little bit about that. That's quite interesting to me because being from the recruitment industry and working with multiple different clients and sites where people are working at, always had to be, I guess, having to go out and do risks and hazards, and depending on the company and how tech savvy they are or streamlined their back of office is, work health safety has always had this sort of connotation of so much paperwork, and it's like, I've got to do another risk or another swims, and it's just, it gets filed away in a big filing cabinet and never seen again. And so it's interesting that you're moving to that online platform. Surely that's going to make things a little bit easier for breweries and clientele of the like. Are you able to talk to us about how that's going to work?
Yeah, sure. And look, we always wanted to take the offering online. The reality was, from where we started, it was a bit of a see if it's going to work first, and commercially needing to get to a bit of scale to make that kind of leap. So we absolutely are excited about taking it online. I think the other really important thing to understand about safety, as you touched on, is yes, the online tools are important, but at the end of the day, it still requires people to apply the time, effort and resource to it. And we see that not just with brewers, but with lots of clients where we're looking for a solution to tick the box without spending time and effort on it. So whilst, yes, we're taking it online, we absolutely are committed to making sure that we're partnering with our clients to hold their hand and to be there to support and to prompt them when they need a bit of a push and to make sure that they are progressing and committed to safety over time. Yeah, so we're certainly excited about taking the product online. It's the key thing. Some of the elements of the program that we're taking online include the communities. So we'll be able to have the members that are on the portal being able to ask questions of some of the safety consultants or, in fact, of some of the other brewers about what they're experiencing in relation to safety, or maybe offering some learnings if they have a near miss, or potentially even looking at areas where they've really seen some improvement for their team around safety. And that engagement piece, I think, is going to be really important and really powerful. But the other key learning that we got from the review that we did was also about making sure that there's a clear implementation plan. When you embark on safety, it is a bit of an unknown art for many, and where does it start and finish? And the reality is there isn't a start and finish, it's a journey, and we've got to take people on that journey. But we need to be able to show people milestones to show that they're progressing. So the program's designed to be able to deliver in that format so people are progressing and they can see where they're going with safety.
You touched on some of the benefits for a brewery signing up with you guys and using your services.
Yep.
Did you want to go into a bit more detail about some of the other benefits and potential costs?
Yeah, look, absolutely. In relation to safety, it's one of those things that, let's be honest, it's not the priority, particularly when you're starting. You're focused on getting quality beer, finding some customers, getting it out to the market, and that's totally understood. But for many, it's an itch that they know they need to scratch in the back of your mind at all times. And for many people starting out, that's how it kind of sits. They know they need to get to it, and sometimes they don't know how to start. So, but in terms of the benefits, one of the key things is for owners, employing people, having some comfort that you know that you're doing all you can to get those people home safely at the end of the day to their families. And I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's a reality. I think the next part about why we do that is that people understand as directors, employers, that they've got obligations, and those obligations are personal. So trust me, you don't want to be in a position where the Safe Work Inspector is fining you, or even worse, charging you personally for failure to perform your obligations. And yes, there are some benefits. The obvious question that often comes back is, can we save costs on insurance? And absolutely, if done well, we will absolutely deliver some savings in terms of your workers' comp and potentially your other insurance premiums. But that there's lots of dependencies there, and we can't always demonstrate from the outset the ROI. But we've certainly got some case studies. The guys at Simon at Rocks Brewers, we saved them 20 grand on their workers' comp premium, and he's happy to sing our praises because of that. So there's certainly examples there where we can save money, but to be honest, in most cases, that's not the motivator for people going into the program. It's about genuinely looking after their people and keeping them safe.
Mm. From what I've learned is, I guess with any small business, doesn't have to just be brewing, but is that safety probably isn't neglected. Maybe some businesses are, but it's obviously an under prioritized or not focused thing. Like, there's a lot of things on this podcast that we've brought to light that should be focused on, but safety, I guess, is paramount. And I've tried to structure this podcast to show when people should be thinking about, this particular topic. And even though that this segment's featuring towards the end, it doesn't, I don't want people to sort of feel like it's not being prioritized or focused on. It's just, I guess, the way it sort of happened. But what do you see from brewery owners, just like probably within their first 12 months? I'd imagine that's where the most risk and the most concerns from you being that expert consultant looking at a brewery and what they've got set up. But talk to us a bit about what are some of the major concerns you see with new breweries opening up these days.
Yeah, so the overriding concept is the earlier the better, but it also really does depend on where the founder or the head brewer has come from. And in that sense, a good example of that's Pioneer Brewing, Peter Gerber, mechanical engineer out of the oil and gas industry. He lives and breathes safety, so he's kind of all over it, which is fabulous. But there are plenty of other brewers out there that might have come from a sales and marketing background or professional service background. That, I met one brewer, I can't remember his name, but he was a lawyer who had change of life. So it depends on how much you know to start with, how early and how committed you need to be. But I guess the other aspect of that is certainly in the setup phase, the way you design and lay out a brewery can have significant impacts on how you're going to manage that risk down the track. So simple things like how you're going to access the top of tanks, how you're going to safely lift heavy things where you need to, even simple things like where you place taps so that hoses don't become trip and fall hazards. So those are the things that you need to think about. As we know, there are plenty of breweries that have gone into unique buildings, the ones that are in your industrial estates with plenty of room, easy, fabulous, great layout. The older ones where it's a unique experience, and I get it, that's part of the journey for the customer, but it's even more important in that sense that you actually start thinking about some of these safety things at a design stage, and it can make the end game for safety so much easier.
So what are, I guess you mentioned a couple of the hazards there.
Yep.
But what would you say are, in your top 5 or however many you want to list, hazards that I guess a brewery owner or employees working within the brewing industry?
Yeah, without a doubt, when you look at the severity of the incidents that happen in the industry, the few key ones are certainly chemicals and also high pressure, so operating with pressure vessels. So unfortunately, there has been some pretty serious caustic burns and chemical incidents in the industry, both here locally as well as overseas. Fall from height and mechanical handling. So as I said earlier, simple things like how do we safely access the top of tanks to clean, to put, to add ingredients, all those kinds of things. And manual handling, lifting kegs, moving kegs, those repetitive types of activities that, if done properly, are not a concern at all. However, it's that one-off incident when you might be rushing that all of a sudden, you're injured, and that's a serious injury that can have long-term impacts. So they're probably the key ones. And the other one that I actually had here on the list to talk about is brewery design, which we've kind of touched on there, but really reinforcing that you can eliminate some of these risks by good design.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that in the equipment sourcing. Brewery layout has come up, not necessarily on a safety aspect, more of like an efficiency side of things, but like you're saying, it can avoid a lot of these hazards if you just set up your brewery correctly. Yeah. You said some of these breweries who are manually loading grain into their grain delivery systems. I've done a bit of volunteer work, and I've had to lift up to 500 kilos worth of grain into a batch. And so, manual handling with kegs and so forth. Had Hendo on in an earlier episode, Steve Hendo, talk about one incident that he witnessed where I think a keg or a pressure valve went wrong and knocked a bloke through 2 walls, through the cool room wall and through the building wall. So some really, really dangerous things that can go on. So, all right, well, I guess I also wanted to give the audience some facts and statistics around LTI. So for those that aren't too safety savvy, lost time injuries, incidents, near misses related to the brewing industry. Are you able to go into that?
Yeah, sure. So LTI is a term, if you're not familiar with safety, is one that lots of people talk about. It's really about if an injured person is off work for an extended period, and really that then relates to the cost to your workers' comp, because workers' comp will increase in cost significantly. Anywhere from 3 to up to 9 times the cost of a claim can come back and bite you over a period of time in terms of your workers' comp premium. So everything in terms of injury management is all focused on getting your workers back to work if they do have an incident. And I can't emphasise that enough, that the easiest way to manage your cost from a workers' comp point of view is get your injured people back to work. And even if they're not capable of doing the tasks that they typically would have done, it's actually about finding other tasks for them to do. It might be administrative tasks that they are able to do whilst they're recovering. But the whole concept of recovering at work is absolutely really important. In terms of the frequency rates, we're actually doing a bit of work with the IBA and iCare, who is the industry workers' comp coordinator in New South Wales, about looking at industry rates for brewers, and with the intent of trying to influence some of the industry rates that are applied on the workers' comp premiums. So it's kind of early days there, and we would like to be in a position, particularly as part of the BrewSafe program, to have better data to be able to go to the ICARES and also the other industry bodies in the other states and really be proactive with them and say, guys, we need a better outcome financially for the industry because they're doing great stuff in relation to safety. And these industry bodies are open to that kind of conversation as well.
Yeah, because and I guess going back to how I sort of got to know about you guys, Paul, one of the teachers that was contracted to the Cert 3 course on safety, he gave us a very interesting perspective because work cover has always had this sort of parking inspector type reputation, you know, like, oh, here we go, another guy that just wants to pick things and fine us.
Sure.
But, yeah, I guess they've been given a bit of a tough, well, I guess a reputation that's not quite true, and that if you have some genuine, or if a brewery shows that they've got genuine interests and efforts to want to make their workplace safe, that they're willing to work with you and they're not as cutthroat as you would think. Are you able to share some comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And safety, the legislation for safety is built on the concept of diligence. And diligence at the end of the day is all about best efforts to apply to something like safety. And it's relevant for other types of legislation. But if we focus on safety, then there's actually a framework that Safe Work Australia publish. And in fact, our BrewSafe program is cornerstoned on this 6-element framework that Safe Work Australia publish. And it steps through the 6 elements required for an officer, employer, founder, director, to be able to satisfy their due diligence obligations. So the other way I often describe this is if you're ever in a court and you're being prosecuted in relation to safety, these are the 6 questions that you'd be asked from the barrister or the prosecutor. So really quickly to go through them as an officer, and an officer is someone who is an owner, an employer, and even a head brewer, for example, if you're managing staff. So those people in the business, they need to have an understanding of the hazards and the risks in the business. You can't, if you're a director, say, well, I didn't know because I employed a brewer and he should know. That's not good enough. You've got to have an understanding of your obligations. So hence doing a program like BrewSafe will give you that tick to say, well, hey, I've been trained, I understand. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you've provided adequate resources. Now, adequate, the key piece there, okay? So for a small brewer, clearly very different to the opposition, the Lion Nathans of the world. The resources they should be applying are more, but we need to provide adequate. You've got to be able to contribute, and that can be training, it can be PPE, it can be a range of things, but you've got to be able to demonstrate that you've provided adequate resources. The 4th one is about timely response. So if you have an audit or one of your employees tells you about a hazard, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you're doing something about it in a timely fashion. If it's sitting there for months, then that's obviously not a good look. And then the next one is about enforcement. So if an employer, and often a third party like a contractor, does something wrong, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you've done something about that, and that can lead to things like disciplinary action if it's serious enough. And the last one's the evidence. So all of that, if you're doing all those things but you haven't got any paperwork or records, electronic records to demonstrate it, then you're going to be in trouble. So you can see when you start breaking it down to those 6 elements and you start thinking about, well, what am I doing in relation to safety? If you can confidently answer those 6 questions, you're going to be in a pretty good position. And clearly, we want to make sure that we actually don't have the incident in the first place, and therefore we're not going to be in that position. But if the work cover inspector does walk in, and they will be there when there's a serious incident, but we've actually seen, and Queensland had a bit of a work cover in Queensland had a bit of a campaign where they went and visited a lot of brewers recently. Where they do come in, you want to be in a position where you can confidently talk to them, engage with them and say, yeah, we're doing lots of things. Mr. Inspector, if you've got any ideas, we're open to it. And typically, if you take that approach and you're confident about it, you'll end up with a really good relationship with the regulators. They are different to what they used to be in that they want to engage with industry. They want to add value. They're not there to pick fault and find fault. Clearly, they'll come hard on you where you're not doing the right thing. Where you are, that they're going to work with you.
Are you seeing a trend in, I guess, what size breweries are approaching you? Are are you seeing new and established breweries sort of reach out to you from the day one, or talk about that?
Yeah, it's a real combination, and the way we've set the program up is aligned to the IBA membership tiers. So, those that are members, you will know that you pay a different rate based on how many litres you manufacture. So our prices are aligned to that because we recognise for the smaller brewers starting up, to get a start, you obviously the costs are a challenge, so we need to understand that. But in reality, we've had a real cross-section. So we're doing work at the moment and have done some work for some of the larger brewers that are IBA members, and similarly have recently talked to a couple of breweries that are literally in the setup stage. So it's real combination of end-to-end there. We also know that lots of brewers get started by contract manufacturing until such time as they're ready to start, investing in their own equipment. So another client at the moment is getting us on board, even though they've only just starting to build the plant, but they have product in market that's being manufactured by others, but they're recognizing that, hey, now's the time to do it, so they get things set up right, which, ideal scenario, that to me is the perfect time to start if you can. But having said that, if you're already down the track, it's never too late. That's certainly a key point.
And just on the interaction that you have on obviously you've got the online platform.
Yep.
Surely you've got support over the phone, especially if it's all over the country. But you would also do quite a number of site visits to these breweries. Is that sort of a routine thing that you do? So if someone's a customer of yours, is there sort of amount of times that you go out and do reviews?
Yeah, absolutely. And really important part of it is that, as I said earlier, the online platform is great, but at the end of the day, it's a tool that we need to use. And so our support for the clients is very much a constant engagement. So for most, it'll be a minimum monthly touch point. That might be just a quick phone call to see how you're going. A quarterly scheduled meeting where we actually go through where are you at, how have you gone with that training module, have you addressed those corrective actions that we've identified collectively, and really making sure that we're committing to that continual improvement, and at least a minimum annual formal detailed inspection of the facility to give you feedback on layout, site hazards, those kinds of things as well. But as I say, the guys are traveling a lot. We'll certainly, look to do as much of that as we can face-to-face, but at the same time leveraging the online meeting tools that we can these days that everyone's pretty well familiar with.
The thing I really like about this is it sounds to me like a turnkey type safety program for a new business, especially in the brewing industry. Because going back to, I supplied to a lot of small mums and dad businesses for labour, and their safety system is almost non-existent. Sometimes we offer them, well, we're happy to go in and design and implement a safety system. Not me personally, I've got people that do that, but and that can be tens of thousands of dollars spent to a business owner. So this is a way that I guess a new business owner, a new brewery owner can just sign up with you guys, and all the policies, the SWIMs, the JSAs, whatever you want to call it, it's already there, and they just need to tailor it more to their workplace, chuck their logo on it, and they've got all these policies and procedures all ready to go.
Yeah, so all that content is there, absolutely. And you're right. And we actually do that kind of thing for other clients where if it's a standalone client that needs a safety system, yes, we'll go in and I can tell you the cost would be a lot more than what it is for this program, because we're able to deliver lots of consistent material for the industry. The material was developed when we kicked off 3 years ago through a pilot program. So we went to 3 breweries of, a good cross-section of size and kind of layout and those kinds of things that allowed us to design the policies and procedures, actually how it follows the brewing process. So it should be pretty user-friendly for most breweries, but also have that ability to tailor, as you say, so to make it unique for your situation, which is important as well. So by being able to deliver something which is, as you say, turnkey for the industry, that absolutely allows us to keep those costs down. And similarly, we've got to make sure that we're constantly reviewing the content, updating it, where things change, deliver new content. 13, 14 months ago, there was nothing in the BrewSafe program around COVID. Clearly, there is now. So they're the kinds of things that absolutely we need to keep updating and refreshing all the time.
We've talked a little bit about some of the risks to a brewery, not just on the physical hazards and safety side, but I guess I'd like to talk a bit more about, I guess, what brewery owners face in terms of financial risks. So obviously workers' comp, the insurance premiums, operational risks, brand, culture within the workplace as well.
Sure.
Are you able to touch on some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So BrewSafe is a program that scratches that itch, that safety itch, that thought in the back of your mind that what are we doing about safety? And it's an important one. But as we know, brewers face a range of risks in their business, anything from supply chain issues through to, unfortunately, we've seen a couple of recalls recently in the industry. And so there are a range of risks that the brewing industry faces. As I said earlier, our broader offering for the business is able to support brewers around a range of different risks, and we're actually in the early stages of looking at putting some recall support together that hopefully we'll be able to tell people more about in the near future. But one of the other ones that I think, not just for brewers, but for all businesses, and certainly business in the food and bev industry, it's this concept of change. A great example of that was in COVID, where we had to pivot, we had to adapt, and there were lots of people making hand sanitizer and potentially not understanding the risks that was bringing to the business around flammable liquids and things like that. So change as it occurs, as you grow, what does that mean in terms of the risks of your business, and making sure that you've got that embedded concept in your business around continual improvement in relation to risk. That's certainly something that we try to embed in everything we do.
You mentioned about recalls, and I guess I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say an expert on it now,
Sure.
But got sort of familiar with some of the beer distributors that I interviewed last week, talking about, what a recall, what's involved in terms of costs and all that.
Yeah.
Victual and the BrewSafe program actually has a component in it for particularly recalls. Is that right?
Well, we're actually in the early stages of building that, but for our broader clients, Victual and our response capability to recall is something that we do lots of. And we do actually lots of education for broader industry through industry associations like the AFGC and the Australian Food AIFST. So lots of other education that we do around recall. And part of our service offering there is the insurance side, but also the response side. So if you have a food safety incident and you need support, the story I always tell is watching the footy on a Saturday afternoon with the beer in the hand, and a client rings and they've got a bolt. A client has brought back into the store a bolt in one of their products, and me being able in the middle of a footy match talking through the next steps in terms of how we respond to that. What do we need to do? How do we talk to the customer as one? And then what do we need to tell the regulators, and the range of stakeholders that you need to engage with and respond to that in a timely fashion. The key piece about that recall response is the quicker you respond and the most proactive you are, you'll manage it and mitigate ultimately the cost. And unfortunately, there's a few scenarios, thankfully not in the brewing industry, but in others, where that poor response in the early stages has really hurt them in the long term.
Yeah, I think it was when I was sitting down with Andy Harris from Modus Transport, and we talked a little bit about breweries taking ownership and accountability of when product's gone out and it's not quite consistent enough, or there's a fault that's found out later on, is acting on it as soon as possible, because it can hurt your brand.
Sure.
Yeah, and not just that, but can lead to even more financial cost down the track.
Yeah, and it is important to understand the differentiation between a food safety issue and a quality issue. So quality is about brand and making sure we don't have an inferior product getting to the customer. Food safety issue is absolutely something clearly that could cause harm. So food safety issues are where the regulators clearly will want to get involved more, whereas at the end of the day, those issues around quality and brand are decisions that you need to make to protect your business.
So you mentioned that the BrewSafe program is about to relaunch. Are you able to tell us, I guess, what some of those costs would be involved for a brewery?
Yeah, sure. So one of the key bits of feedback that we got and we've responded to is the previous program required a 2-year commitment, and that was partly because we wanted to tell clients that it's not something you can do in a couple of months. You've got to commit to it in the long term. But that 2-year commitment seemed to be a bit of a barrier and a bridge too far to people. So the new program, there's no obligation. It's a monthly fee. If you're not engaging with it after 6 months, you have to drop out, so be it. And it's up to our guys and my team to keep you engaged and keep you on board and keep you committed to that safety journey. So monthly fees, and there's a tiered pricing model, which will be on the website, which we're launching very soon, starting at about $200 a month. So it absolutely is designed to be cost effective, and we can deliver it in that way, as I said, because we've designed it for some standard processes that apply to the whole industry.
And so, yeah, that's a monthly recurring fee.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
No worries. Yeah, always there's a lot of eager people listening who are always putting together their business plan and figuring out what else they need to add to the final cost.
For sure.
All right, industry insights. So I've gotten a lot of guests on to talk about the future of craft in Australia, and I know that the topic is predominantly safety. Yeah, is there any interesting insights that you can talk about related to the brewing industry regarding safety?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did touch on earlier that we're working with the IBA to try and engage with some of the workers' comp regulators around industry rates, and the more data we've got to be able to go to them, the better in that regard. So that's something that we're very focused on to try and contribute back to the industry. I think the other piece to acknowledge is with higher profile, and the craft brewing industry profile is certainly growing through the great efforts of the IBA and the success of many of the craft brewers. With that greater profile does come greater scrutiny. So, for example, we did see in Queensland the WorkSafe authorities run through a bit of a focus campaign for brewers, and that was done in, I think, and I'm sure some of the brewers in Queensland may not agree, but a proactive effort by the regulators to really hopefully provide some focus and effort on safety in that industry. And there was a lot of good content that they developed at that time to try and promote that. But I think with that high profile comes the scrutiny. I think the other piece that is really relevant for the industry is the retailers. And I guess, looking at more broadly the food industry, as I said, we work with lots of food manufacturers. Many of them, their key customers are the key retailers, and they have a big influence on the way they manage risk. So the retailers, particularly in a food safety element, have very strict requirements about how you manage risk. And that does extend to safety at times as well. And at the end of the day, that's retailers looking after their business, yes. But what it does do over time is actually lift the quality of risk management across the industry. And I think the reputation Australia has for food safety, as an example, is as a result of that really high standard that some of the retailers set.
Okay, perfect. Just coming towards the end, Pete, any closing thoughts or advice you'd like to part ways with?
Yeah, probably the key thing that I really want to emphasize is the why. So we often are asked, I guess, why we do what we do. And the story I refer to in relation to safety is talking to a CEO, and this was almost a decade ago now, and him almost coming to tears because it was the anniversary date of when he was a CEO of a business where there was a death in the business. And it was 7 years after that date. And he was ringing the people that were involved in that incident, even though some of them weren't even still employees of his company, he was ringing them to make contact and check that they were okay, because it had such a profound impact on him and on them. And I even start to get emotional thinking about it. But you never want to be in that situation. And so that's why we do what we do, and that's why we think this is really important, particularly for brewers as they start to grow. And risk management is a journey, and you will see the benefits of it over time. So don't ever think that you're going to be able to, have a push on it for a couple of months and then be able to forget about it and think it's all done. It is about committing to it over time, that concept of continual improvement. And yes, it is about safety and avoiding injuries, but it actually makes you a better business. It gets your staff engaged. Your customers start to see your staff are happy. It does have a broader impact on your business and your culture at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's continuing what you were saying there is it seems to be somewhat of an afterthought with some breweries because they are probably not too aware or attentive to it until something actually happens.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to deal with a lot more issues, both culture, branding, and financially, if they only adhere to it after the fact that something's happened. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We also, when we measure safety with things like LTI, often those measures are after the fact.
Yeah.
So we absolutely have to focus on those things that we're doing to prevent. Okay, and they're things like, are we training people? Are we providing them with PPE? Are we giving them that knowledge that the hazards and risks in their business? So they're the things that we need to focus on just as much as the after the fact.
All right. Anything you'd like to take this opportunity to plug? What's happening in the Victual world and new programs? Obviously, BrewSafe is rebranding, relaunching, but anything you'd like to mention?
Yeah, look, that's the key piece for us. It's a great time for us to do this podcast because we are literally about to relaunch the BrewSafe program. So we'll certainly include in the notes to the podcast the new website. We encourage your listeners to go there. If you're interested, certainly reach out, make contact. We'll also include a coupon in there and give your listeners a bit of a benefit to contribute to the program. And all I would say is get on board, get involved, and the more involved we have the members on the program, I think the more we'll learn from each other as well.
Yeah, and if anyone listening, any breweries in planning or established, how do they get in touch? Yeah,
the simplest way is brewsafe@victual.com.au or our 1300 number, 1300 732 255. Or as I say, just go to the website, Victual.
Yeah, and I'll be putting in the show notes for everyone some links to your website and so they can easily find you guys. But well, thanks again, Pete, for coming on and sharing some thoughts. Like I said, there was no intention to have safety towards the end of the podcast because it is a very important consideration. And like I said, we've had other guests touched on it, but wanted to dedicate an entire episode to it. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on it. But once again, everyone, that was Peter Mcgee from Victual. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 4 and the final episode of the People and Culture Training and Safety segment. Coming towards the pointy end of our original series, I catch up with Benedict from BSK Projects to discuss project management services for an aspiring brewery owner to engage in their brewery build. As always, if you are liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you are listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au. I'll also mention to listeners that we now have a new Build Me a Brewery discussion group linked to our Facebook page. Now, this is a group of keen listeners and like-minded people discussing their brewery build plans and providing advice to others on the subject. Link to this group will be in the episode show notes. That's all for now. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.